Hillary Flint with Unity Council. Before we get started, a couple housekeeping notes. Please keep yourself muted if you're not speaking. We do ask that you raise your hand if you have a question or put it in the chat. And if anyone here is press, please identify yourself in the comments. Our wonderful leader, Jamie Wallace, will be joining us shortly, and she will get us kicked off. Thanks for your patience.
Hello, everyone. Step outside.
I thought there wasn't a problem.
Thank you for joining us tonight for our research review roundtable. We will be having different speakers that have been doing research in East Palestine or are getting ready to do research in East Palestine speak to us tonight just to tell us a little bit about their research and why it's important that we get the research done. So with that, I will hand it off short and sweet to our first speaker. And our first speaker will be Nancy Alderman.
Hi, can you hear me? Because I am the first speaker. I just want to be sure that you can hear me okay. All right. So my name is Nancy Alderman. I'm president of Environment and Human Health. It is a nonprofit organization of 11 physicians and public health professionals. Its mission is to protect the public from environmental harms. So I will now start with my remarks. When the Norfolk Southern train derailed in East Palestine, Ohio on Friday evening, February 3rd, it was clear then that the spilling of the train's toxic chemicals were going to cause an environmental disaster of monumental proportions. The chemicals that were spilled onto the land were extremely toxic to humans, wildlife, and to marine life. These are not new chemicals. They are, in fact, chemicals that we know a lot about and have known about them for a long time. They have been studied for years, and their toxicity and health effects to humans are extremely well documented. Some of the known chemicals that spewed out into East Palestine on February 3rd were vinyl chloride, butyl acrylate, benzene, and isobutylene. Although they each have different toxicities, most cause nose, throat, and lung irritations. Some cause headaches, vomiting, and bone marrow issues, and some are carcinogenic. It was already an environmental disaster on February 3rd. But when Norfolk Southern decided to burn many train cars that were carrying these chemicals in order to clear the train tracks on February 5th, that turned what was a local disaster into a wide-ranging, enormous disaster that contaminated the properties and watercourses for miles around, and even contaminated land in Pennsylvania. By burning the toxic chemicals that were in the railroad cars, Norfolk Southern caused what was already highly toxic chemicals to form into many new toxic chemicals and caused dioxin to form in the plume of black smoke that landed on properties for miles beyond the original site. Dioxin is highly toxic and can result in skin lesions and blisters. It can harm liver function and impair the immune and endocrine systems and cause cancer. At this point, it became clear to us at Environment and Human Health that there would be many properties that would never be able to be inhabited again, and that there were many houses that were so contaminated they would have to be condemned. Instead of that, 3 days later, by February 8th, the residents were told they could return to their properties, that everything was now safe. Of course, that could not be possible. Meanwhile, many residents began to get sick. All the health effects of the many toxic chemicals that spilled were now showing up in many residents: sore throats and eyes, breathing problems, instances of blood in the urine, bloody noses, serious problems with menstrual cycles, rashes, headaches, seizures, and stroke-like symptoms. At this point, the railroad should have been made to buy the contaminated homes so the residents could move to safer ground. But that is not what happened. East Palestine is not a rich community. It is a community of about 5,000 people made up of farmers, dog breeders, horse farmers, and dairy farmers. This is not a place where people can afford to just abandon their homes and move to where it is safe. The harmed residents needed the railroad to buy their contaminated homes. Instead, the railroad did not buy their toxic homes, but instead started to use their funds to establish new parks, create fireworks displays, give the grammar, middle, and high schools $300,000, buy certain contaminated business buildings along a contaminated creek, but nothing to buy out the sick people's contaminated properties. As the railroad poured money into East Palestine, the residents became divided. Corporations have learned over the years how to circumvent their financial responsibilities. Once the railroad divided the town, they knew it would be harder for the harmed residents to get what they needed. This roundtable talk is now 8.5 months from the time the train derailed and changed people's lives forever. Many residents have been sick for the whole time as their properties remained toxic. The railroad caused this environmental disaster, and it is their responsibility to get people to safer ground. So those are my comments, and I wait for the next person. Thank you very much.
Stephen Lester.
Yes, yes. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Jamie, for inviting me to participate in this forum tonight. My name is Stephen Lester. I'm the Science Director with the Center for Health, Environment, and Justice, based in Falls Church, Virginia. My role with CHEJ is to provide the science. We were founded in 1981 when by Lois Gibbs, who's the community leader at Love Canal in Niagara Falls, New York. I got my start in this business when I was hired by the state of New York to be the science advisor to those residents at Love Canal. One of the chemicals identified at Love Canal, which is one of the worst toxic disasters in American history, was a compound called dioxin. Dioxin is one of the nastiest chemicals that's ever been tested in this country. And EPA spent about 20 years trying to come up with a risk assessment for dioxin and never was able to do that for their cancer risk. And I want to repeat that they were never able to finish that cancer risk assessment for dioxin. But CHEJ had a long history following all of that work and for over 20 years, and we have a great experience with dioxin. We even wrote a book called Dying from Dioxin. Now, dioxin, so my colleague and I, just a couple of days ago, completed a report looking at EPA's dioxin testing that they've done in the last, it's been out for several weeks. It was several months, I should say. They provided, they collected over 130 surface samples and 133 subsurface samples. And all that data was put on their website, and we took a look at that, and we came up with our report that was given to the Community Council on Friday. I'd like to share with you some of our findings from that report. This dioxin testing was conducted by Norfolk Southern in response to the train derailment and subsequent intentional burning of vinyl chloride and other toxic chemicals. And what it does is fails to address many of the questions raised by local residents about their potential exposures to dioxins. Based on our analysis of EPA's testing approach and results, additional testing is clearly needed. This additional testing should be designed to address the public health risks posed by the contamination caused by the derailment and subsequent burning. Based on the data provided by EPA and the information provided to support that data and how it was collected, It's not possible to tell, for example, where dioxin is and where dioxin isn't in this community, nor is it possible to determine the concentration of dioxins at any given location. And this is because EPA did not disclose the actual location of any of the samples that were collected. This is important because without this information, you cannot determine what the public health risks are. Some of our key findings include that the initial sampling plan developed by Arcadis for North Fork Southern and approved by EPA was never intended to identify the public health risks of the train derailment and subsequent burning of vinyl chloride. The approach for determining where to collect samples by Arcadis for Norfolk Southern that was also approved by EPA was highly unusual and very subjective, and was not consistent with standard procedures for investigating contaminated sites. Norfolk Southern's sampling plan involved walking the area and looking for visual evidence of contamination caused by the derailment and subsequent burning. Yet, despite many of these limitations in EPA's testing approach, some sample measurements did detect significant levels of dioxin. A significant number of samples that were collected as part of EPA's dioxin sampling effort did exceed EPA and other benchmarks and guidelines for evaluating public health risks of dioxin and warrant additional action. Yet EPA has refused to conduct additional testing or to take action to address these findings. One of the questions that this finding really raises is, why were these levels high? Are there hotspots there? Were there other explanations for why these levels were significant in these places? But again, EPA will not follow up. The highest level found in the EPA testing was 510 parts per trillion of dioxin of the 2378 tetrachlorodibenzoparadioxin, or TCDD. That's half the level that was the basis for evacuating the town in Times Beach, Missouri. So that's a significant level. Yet EPA refuses to go in and test. Our study also finds that if we averaged all of dioxin results, it still exceeded the EPA's own risk screening level or regional screening level for TCDD. And so again, it begs the question of what's going on here. And EPA again refuses to follow up and look at why these levels were significant in the places where they were. EPA, one more point, and then I'll wrap up. The community is given every opportunity by EPA to build trust, engagement, and involve the public in their testing for dioxin. But EPA has responded with complicated presentation of results in which nothing is clear and little makes sense, rather than being forthcoming about its plans, processes, and results. And it has provided no analysis of its results. EPA needs to conduct additional testing in the areas where significant concentrations of dioxin were found.
He is reading that EPA study on the EPA. You know what I'm talking about?
Hi,
Oh.
if you are not speaking today, please mute yourself. Thank you.
Anyhow, EPA needs to do this additional testing in order to evaluate whether there were hotspots and why these contaminant levels were high in these areas. And I would recommend that a scientist appointed by the community needs to be included in this follow-up testing and investigation. It's also evident that EPA needs to communicate more directly with the people who have been impacted by this and provide the kind of information that they've been asking for months. I will be around and available to answer any other questions about dioxin or this report that we provided last week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen Lester. Scott Smith will be speaking next.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. And Nancy Alderman and Stephen Lester, fantastic opening, your statements and everything. And I want to reincorporate everything word by word that you guys said as I present and reveal some data tonight from some testing, and look forward to working with all of you, the two of you and everyone else, and follow up. A little bit of background on me. I've been involved in over 60 contamination events, starting with my own in 2006, that wiped out my life as I knew it, and my business and my employees, and I have gone as a passion project into disasters and try to help people not to have to go through what I go through. I have 25 patents where I'm a named inventor on environmental and testing remediation that I've used a lot of data from my on-the-ground field work. I have a great team of experts around me. Some of you have talked to them. I'm the main person in the front to protect their current careers right now, but they have over 150 years of dioxin and related experience, and that includes a toxicologist and a medical expert. My main goal is to get the data using the proper lab procedures. Do not have any grant funding, spent between 90 to 100,000. As everyone knows, our focus has been on dioxins, about $550 a test. And I believe it's complementary to all the other independent testing people here. And the goal here is to take what we find, get it to the community, get it to the residents, get it to the appropriate toxicologists and medical doctors, and let them address the synergistic toxicity, additive toxicity, because in my view, the EPA continues to discredit much of all of our work by citing a singular exposure to a singular chemical. And there's a lot of chemicals here that need to be addressed, and it starts by identifying that. With that being said, I have some short slides I want to go through. Can everybody see the screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So what I'm going to talk about briefly here in the next few minutes, first of all, preliminary dioxin soil testing results from February 20th to October 12th. I originally set out to come to East Palestine 2 times at the request of residents. Tomorrow, I begin my 22nd trip and 26th round of testing. And there are 30 to 35% of our soil samples are elevated relative to background. Because of the time constraints tonight, I am not getting into the furnace filters and why they matter, but I am coming out to do more testing. And at Wednesday at 6 p.m. at the offices of East Palestine Justice in Columbiana, I'm going to go into a much more thorough, in-depth presentation and take a lot of questions from press and community. So, and also, now back to this presentation, recent quotes from Mark Durno and the EPA, courtesy of Joy Marie Mann, in light of these testing results and other independent results. And combined with what Mark Durno says, with Stephen Lester's memo, it is, taken with this data. I encourage everyone to thoroughly look at it. And number 3, I'll close with this, Thomas Edison and why he as an example is relative, because you can't talk about any of this stuff without being, the reality is there's a false PR narrative coming from Norfolk Southern and the EPA. So here we have, as of October 12th, 45 East Palestine soil samples. Now, and again, I defer to Stephen Lester and all the experts. It is my understanding, it's agreed by the experts, rural background, non-impacted communities where there hasn't been an event like a derailment or some other contamination. 29 of our samples, 64% exceed 3 parts per trillion, and this is the TEQ, toxic equivalency. 31% or 14 samples exceed 6 parts per trillion. 29% or 13 samples greater than 8 parts per trillion. And then this proposed screening level from the Arcadis report that I went through with my team of experts has a proposed screening level of 4.8 parts per trillion relative to the TEQ for dioxins. 38% of our samples are there. So far, we're looking around 30% are areas that we believe need to be followed up and need a lot more expert input and review. And not all, I mean, we have 70% where the soil samples appear to be close to the background. And I want to also say, at the request or permission of residents, these names are being disclosed. And why? I've had a lot of calls that people feel that they're being bullied and threatened. They have health symptoms. They're too scared to come out. And I want to encourage to those people listening that these individuals have given their permission and or their request. Reach out to them. If you're an affected resident and you're being threatened and you feel unsafe, please reach out to these residents. Reach out to Unity Council. They can talk to you anonymously. So you can see these are the soil samples with the residents. And if you take the accepted background residential soil TEQ in parts per trillion, it's 6 parts. It goes all the way up to 1900. So everywhere from 283% of greater than background to almost 32,000%. This is the same information in graphical form. And these are the dioxin TEQ is, we have the Enchanted Salon. Those results just came in, and that's across the street, I think, from the EPA Welcome Center. And so far, that is one of the higher ones with the soil at 59 TEQ. And then these two were on a separate chart. This is Brushville Supply. These are two soil samples taking a month or so apart, right near ground zero, where we have concerns a lot about the dust. So as you can see here, 460 versus 6, 1900 versus 6, again, TEQ parts per trillion. Now, we also look at total dioxins and furans, and we want to make sure we disclose all this data to the toxicologists and medical professionals. So we went to Salem, Ohio, where we know the plume was not, and doing a control, and in parts per trillion, was 1,641 of total dioxins and furans. And you can see the elevated, same ones from the elevated TEQ, the total dioxins and furans go from 3,349 or 104% more all the way up to 604,064, almost 37,000% more. Again, what we are saying, a lot more testing is needed. We're happy to provide this to all the subject matter experts or anybody that wants to work in good faith to help us get to the truth. And here are the total dioxins and furans from Salem, Ohio to Enchanted Salon, graph number 1, and then graph number 2 reflecting the data. So, and then on the recording of EPA Mark Durno, we had it transcribed. And for those of you that haven't listened to it, Joy Marie Mann released this on Friday. Mark Durno has admitted, I will be the first to acknowledge that we have waited way too long to do this assessment of the creeks. I can tell you why, but you don't want to hear that. And Mark Durno admits EPA negotiated with Norfolk Southern on its sampling plan. A lot of respect for Judith Inc. And I'd love to hear her weigh in at some point about that. I thought the EPA was in charge in this whole negotiation thing in light of the FOIA lawsuit with the EPA, with the Government Accountability Project, and the EPA refusing to test resident soil. And to put that into context, the EPA has $12 billion budget and 17,000 employees. It would be it wouldn't even be a rounding error in their budget to test the requested homes and soil samples. And Mark Durno says indoor air sampling is too complicated. One of the concerns, why aren't you doing indoor testing? Indoor testing is complex, or a whole lot of chemicals in people's homes that have nothing to do with the train derailment. Well, as you know, you don't even need my testing or anybody else's to know. None of these health symptoms were ubiquitous in the environment. Nancy did a great job describing them. I don't need to describe them again, but and that this narrative from the EPA is just not credible, because if these chemicals in your homes were making you sick, these health symptoms would have been ubiquitous in the environment. And again, here's points 4 and 5. Make this PowerPoint available to anybody that wants it. And here is on the bullet point 4 is Mark Durno talking about that he does believe health concerns are from early exposures. And if you didn't look at the data, would you think there are still ongoing exposures? Of course, based on what I'm hearing. Again, if you work for the taxpayers and the residents, your narrative on what you say to people in the public should all be the same, I believe. So this is interesting to say the least. And, and the EPA is basing on data. And again, as Stephen Lester pointed out, it's pretty clear that the EPA's data is lacking. And then finally, being the guy out front, I'm used to the PR and the false narratives and what's being said. And here's, Thomas Edison is referred to as a scientist and inventor. And I am not a PhD. However, I have PhDs around me that guide me. And I do have 25 patents as a named inventor. Thomas Edison didn't have a high school degree. He's still the most prolific inventor, and they refer to him as a scientist with over 1,000 patents. I say I only have 25 because I'm overeducated probably. I have an undergraduate degree from Baylor in economics and a Harvard Business School degree. Harvard Business School degree serves me very well because it taught me to deal with some condescending, arrogant people. And from time to time, although 90% of the people I deal with at the EPA are great, I do deal with some condescending arrogance. So the Harvard Business degree serves me well in that regard. So, and I'll end up with saying, when people see about these problems, we need to look at this in a different way. That's why I'm happy to work with all the subject matter experts. And what I always say as the railroad and the EPA and they ramp up all the narratives and the PR attacks, I'm doing everything by the book, by the guidance of the PhDs and the subject matter experts. And if you look at your lights, your smartphone, and your computer, what do they have in common? Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Thomas Edison. None of them have PhDs, let alone college degrees. So with that being said, my door remains open to the EPA and the railroad to test side by side. I don't take anything personally. Look forward to working with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Now we'll be hearing from Dr. Andrew Welton.
All right, thank you very much. And if I may share my screen, I only have about 3 minutes of sharing. So thanks for the opportunity to be here. I only have 3 slides, and many of you know me or heard about what's going on here at Purdue University. I just wanted to update you about some of the work that we've done, and also where we're going with it. So in February, we got involved mid-February with the response to the chemical spill and chemical fires. And we have since conducted 6 field investigations. Initially, we were not funded by anybody. And then thankfully, due to a group called United for East Palestine, Open Collective, crowdfunding, and the National Science Foundation, we're able to do more. My team at Purdue University works on disaster response and recovery when it deals with scientific issues. So whether they be chemicals are spilled in a chemical spill, or there's a wildfire, and you need to determine what you're looking for, what infrastructure is contaminated, does it pose a health risk? And if so, what do you do about it? Well, since February, we have conducted, as I mentioned, 6 field investigations, and we've done a lot. We have first teamed with local households and community groups to understand the issues that families and businesses were facing. We started collecting data initially just to look at drinking water. But then it turned out when we showed up 3 weeks after the event that there was extensive contamination up and down Sulphur Run, down Leslie Run, and ultimately the contamination moved 170 miles down the Ohio River. There was a much greater need for scientific support when we arrived, so we expanded our testing. We conducted creek water sampling, soil sampling. We looked at the chemical biodegradability in the creeks. We looked at how effective those white pads were on tops of the creeks for sucking up the chemicals that they were meant to suck up. We also evaluated the impact of aeration and what that did on the chemicals, because there was some debate about whether or not it was facilitating organisms breaking down the chemicals or it was blowing contamination to the air. Within buildings, we helped businesses and residents, documented experiences, identified acute health impacts and issues that were occurring while we were there and since then, and we provided advice and evidence directly to US EPA's administrator, US EPA Region 5, field staff at US EPA. We've also communicated with Ohio EPA, the Governor's Office of Ohio, the Governor's Office of Pennsylvania, and elected officials in Pennsylvania as well. And so I'm just going to leave this slide here. This is kind of a summation of what we have been involved with. And so much of our work has focused on trying to understand the chemical exposure pathways, the pathways at which people may have come in contact with the chemicals from the initial open burn or the fires, or during the decontamination process where the environment was being ridded of contamination and the buildings were contaminated and being ridded and cleaned too. And so with that, you'll be hearing more from us, hopefully in the next couple months or sooner, depending on when the data is finally vetted and ready for public dissemination. In the meantime, we've shared results at our website. There are interim presentations available at plumbingsafety.org. Check at the Ohio, Pennsylvania Chemical Incident tab. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Welton. Next, we will have Dr. Lauren Spearing speaking.
Hi, thank you. I'm also going to share some slides. Okay, so my name is Lauren Spearing, and I'm a professor in civil engineering at the University of Illinois, Chicago. And many of you may have seen flyers or talked to myself or some of our project team about this study, but we're specifically focused on community experiences surrounding water, home, and environmental impacts. And so a little bit about our project team. So Dr. Welton just spoke. He's working with us on this project. And then I'm leading the project, and most of my work focuses on connecting communities and how we manage the built environment. We're also working with Dr. Clayton Lukic from Cleveland State University, who grew up just down the road from East Palestine. I want to point everybody to our project website. Again, I can share these slides and share this information. But we'll constantly be providing updates on the website. So I'll point you this direction throughout the next few minutes. We're funded by the National Science Foundation. And I want to note that a lot of this work has to do with talking with community members and community surveys. And so it has been reviewed by the Human Subjects and Research Ethics Boards at all the universities involved. So quickly, I want to just overview why we're doing this study. The overall purpose is to understand people's experiences related to home and water impacts. And we're documenting public perceptions and attitudes about things like the effectiveness of communication from responding organizations, the level of trust in test results, and where people are seeking out information. So the real goal is to understand how people responded and really what communities need going forward. So what we're doing is documenting this information, and as quickly as we can, we will be sharing it with the community and responding organizations. We're also conducting interviews with disaster responders or any stakeholders involved in the response to understand how they collected environmental data and disseminating, and any issues they had disseminating results. Specifically focusing on risk communication here. So why is this beneficial? What we're going to do is we're anonymizing the results and sharing them with the community and decision makers. I'm going to talk about our survey specifically, and I'm expecting these results to be posted in the upcoming weeks. But it really helps to quantify and voice people's concerns and experiences. So we're actually able to kind of put numbers behind a lot of the stories that we've all been hearing, and then share that with people who are have the potential to create policy changes or adjust the management going forward. So part of this work was a community survey. And so this has been open for 2 months, from July till September. And it just closed recently. And since then, we've been working very hard to analyze the results and get it out to the community as quick as possible. Surveys were completed online, in person, or sent via mail. And anybody who participated had to be 18 years or older and live or work in one of the counties shown on this figure to the right on February 3rd. And so you can see that majority of our responses did come from Columbiana County, but Beaver and Lawrence County represented 20%. So our final number of responses was about 256. And I want to note that note for valid just means that they were fully completed surveys. Okay, so right now we're finishing up analysis and we're drafting a summary report. And then quick update on the interviews. Many of you have maybe spoken with me or my graduate student, Joe, but we've completed 52 interviews, which just helps to voice people's stories. And the analysis is in progress. And so that involves us going through each interview to find themes and start to quantify the information. And then we're currently conducting interviews with disaster responders. So some next steps. First, I want to thank you to everybody who participated and took their time with the survey or interview. The next thing you'll see from us is a survey summary report, and this will be posted on our project website in the upcoming weeks, but I'll also share it with community groups and any participants who included their contact information. We're also going to share this widely with decision makers and legislators so that community perspectives can really be made known. If you would like to be notified when the report is online, feel free to email me at spearing@uic.edu, and I'll send you a note once it's up. And that is my update, but yeah, again, please feel free to reach out with questions.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Dr. Erin Haynes.
Great. Well, good evening, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm honored to be invited, and just want to say, welcome to everyone. So I am an environmental health scientist. I have been trained in toxicology at the University of Cincinnati, and then also an environmental health scientist training at the University of Michigan. So I work with communities to help understand their exposure, doing exposure assessment, biomarker analysis, and then a community report back, and giving risk communication and engaging the community in all phases of the study. So I've had the privilege of working with many residents in East Palestine on this particular disaster, which is just horrific to see that event occur, and then to watch the saga going through is it's quite painful, and I really feel for the community. So I do have a community advisory board in which this group has given excellent feedback, and in talking to many residents to help guide what are the questions, how can we best answer them together. So as soon as we could, after the derailment, we launched a East Palestine Health Tracking Survey that has, I'll say, nearly 400 residents who participated. It is still open to complete because we want to give everyone a chance to document their health concerns and their experiences. We are planning to follow these residents, all of the participants, for as long as possible, because one of the concerns that we have is and I'm sure that in the community is for long-term tracking, and then also measuring health outcomes in the long term over time. So I think that's very important, and I'm grateful to all the participants to keep answering the questions and doing this so that we can then share the information with the state legislators, policy, the research community, your community, and then also providing recommendations to healthcare providers for what what to look out for, what to watch, maybe what to also do testing on. So I want to mention biomarker testing briefly. We did a small pilot of 20 people. We invited 20 residents who live within a mile of the derailment, and we collected blood and urine because that was a main question. I kept seeing individuals, you know, going to get testing and looking at biomarkers of exposure, and that's a really, and it's an important step, but it had been, you know, months after the derailment. We did this in July. And if I could just use the opportunity to talk about these chemicals briefly. I know there was hesitancy from the state, and they said, you know, this is not, you know, we're not going to do this testing. And, you know, although samples could have been collected and stored, I'll say that these chemicals don't have off the shelf. This is you know, they don't have best approaches for analyzing them as a specific biomarker. I know some of the analytes that I saw in urine and their tests aren't exactly associated with that, you know, let's say with vinyl chloride, for instance. So I am working with a lab to help develop new methods. So we're taking it as almost like it's, you know, it's interesting that we have to actually go back and go to the lab and ask for brand new methods to be developed to actually be able to measure a specific target analyte. So I am working with Dr. Judy Westrick at Wayne State University. She's been very gracious to help explore this question, and is doing these analyses now in urine. It's not, I wish it was like ready to go and we had the data ready to give back, because we're writing letters to each person who participated, and then we'll have a summary. But it's taking longer than she anticipated, because it's just not a standard procedure. So she's investing in the time it takes. So it's not done, but it's taking longer than anticipated. We did also analyze from the CDC. They were very gracious to analyze the blood samples for dioxin, because that had been a big concern. Like, what about the dioxin in the community? So that data is underway. We have waiting on 3 more samples to come back from the lab. And as soon as those return, we have our letter, you know, everything's ready to go, and we'll be launching that, you know, information back as soon as possible. We also had wristbands that we provided, that they're silicone and they absorb, or they passively absorb chemicals that are in the air. So that is in process. I'll give you a little peek of what we're thinking. Once I saw that Dr. Westrick at Wayne State could begin looking and measuring chemicals like acrolein and the acrobutylate and butylates, those chemicals, that wasn't originally on our plan. But once we did a test and we saw that she could measure those, so we're planning to cut the wristbands and then have it go, part of the original plan was to Duke University, and the other part would go to her at Wayne State. So we're going to get more than we anticipated, which is very exciting. It just takes longer than, you know, I wish we had this data back in August, but we don't. So that is a summary of what we're currently working on, and planning for the future is getting all of the data together and being able to then communicate it back so that it, you know, it makes sense, it's transparent and fully understandable. So, and we're grateful to all the participants who've given their time, and I'm sure they're anxious to get their data back, and I'm just as anxious as they are, because I want to see it and be able to talk to them about it. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Haynes. Our next speaker will be Dr. Schumacher from Case Western Reserve.
Good evening, everyone. Just put up some slides. So I'd like to thank the organizers and all the other speakers for this opportunity, and then just everyone else who took the time out of their evening to join. So my name is Frederick Schumacher. I'm up at Case Western Reserve University in School of Medicine. I'm a professor in genetic and cancer epidemiology. That's primarily what my training is. And, I think Dr. Haynes set up this pretty well with that. The goal here is to look at long and short-term impacts, particularly the long. So getting a sense of what is the impacts of this overall environment. So what we did was we started the Healthy Futures research study. This is trying to get a sense of the public impact within this region for this train derailment. And what we submitted was in the spring, and I'm kind of presenting this because I think it gives a little bit of understanding of the unfortunate of like how it takes a while to get these kind of studies up and running. So it's not necessarily a delay from like the researcher side or the interest. It's just that just when you put together the resources, it can take a while. And this was something we submitted to the NIH back in the spring, March of or April of 2023. And the idea was to start a community engagement assessment, get a sense of working with the community to develop a baseline cohort. We wanted to collect some baseline questionnaire information, and we also wanted to collect some biospecimen information samples. And this would be part of the Healthy Futures pilot. And the two aims of this is one, to focus on some semi-structured interviews that we were going to develop later on. And then the first thing was to also measure the somatic mutation rate. I'm going to talk briefly about that in a second here. But what we realized was the funding was going to take a long time for us to be able to accrue and be before we could actually get down to East Palestine. So we were able to cobble together some local pilot resources here within Cleveland, particularly from the Case Cancer Center, as well as from what we have this organization called the CTSC. And we wanted to make sure we could get down as soon as possible. We wanted to make sure that if we're measuring something, we're not missing the baseline risk back to February of 3rd. And so we focused on 4 counties, Columbiana and Mahoney, as well as Lawrence and Beaver County. And we attended several different fairs within the area and spent multiple days down there, probably approximately about 72 hours, 13 days. We met with some community leaders and continued to do that. And we began rolling out our survey at the end of July. And then we've been collecting biospecimens over the last couple of weeks. The biospecimens that we're collecting, and this is not a biology class, so I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but just to give you a sense, because I think it shows, the different type of assessment we're doing compared to Dr. Haynes and some others. So what we're thinking about looking at is we have over here on the right-hand side of the cartoon is normal DNA. And if you look down at the bottom, once DNA has accumulated a certain number of what we call genetic insults, that can lead to some damaged DNA. So a question becomes is what are those genetic insults? Well, there's several of them. It can range from anywhere from UV light to lifestyle and behavioral habits. It can also be just typical aging. As you age, you accumulate errors across your DNA, and those errors become a little bit more permanent within the somatic tissues. Another source of genetic insults is pollutants. And we know that that high amounts of any kind of exposure can lead to a rapid increase of these insults right away. So this is why the importance we wanted to get down to East Palestine quickly. Now, there's also another part of this story is once the DNA is damaged, this isn't germline, so it's not passed on from to the next generation, but you can actually repair some of that DNA. And that repair system is internal. It's based on a number of factors of, from your age to how many variants that you picked up. If you actually damage part of the repair system, then it's going to be a little bit slower. And the importance of understanding maybe this DNA damage is that it's an increased risk for disease, particularly several different neurological disorders as well as cancer. So cancer is really a genetic disease. You have an accumulation of these mutation events, and then eventually that could lead to a tumor cell. Now, the pros to this is that, like Dr. Haynes suggested, is when you're trying to measure a particular chemical, you got to know what you're measuring, and there may not be assays for this. Because the genotoxicity level here or the somatic mutation rate is not specific, we don't actually need to know what caused it. We're just trying to get it's kind of further down the stream, closer to the disease process of understanding what is the total amount of that. Now, that's a weakness as well as a strength. And the weakness is because then we can't necessarily determine if it's always from a chemical exposure. It could also be just from other things like your previous employment or lifestyle behaviors, or whether it was inherited. Another weakness from this is that we don't know actually how to define exposure sometimes. So that depends on, whether you actually had the chemical or an intermediate within your blood or your urine. And this is something that we're trying to think about strategies how to alleviate. Several of the things we're thinking about is using individual risk factors as well as these weighted joint factors. And this would be kind of thinking about people's symptomology. So some of the questionnaires we asked is, what were the immediate symptoms you felt after the derailment and immediately within the time frame for exposure? And this also contribute to the long-term follow-up. So, do you continue to have these reported symptoms, or maybe even some of the additional or newer symptoms? The other thing that we can do for exposure level is linking it to environmental data. So some of the publicly available EPA data, as well as people's own home assessments, getting a sense of like how close or how their exposure levels were measured. We could also think about, from once we know if we're going to have funding from the NIH, we're going to collect blood samples, and some of those blood levels could be then measured to determine what the exposure level was for people. And then just thinking about proximity to the sources of the exposure. The other weakness, or the other kind of thing I wanted to think about or explain for, looking at genotoxicity levels, we don't have to have the specific chemical, which is sometimes important, particularly when you have either partial or complete combustion, or you have mixtures of chemicals. You don't necessarily know which one to measure for. So this way, we're just looking at the next step down that's closer to the actual disease state. What we want to really look at is whether that genotoxicity levels differs by an exposed status or unexposed. So as we defined earlier, whether you've had maybe symptoms or whether you did not. This is just like a cartoon of the blue box versus the green box. And underlying each of those boxes is the distribution of other risk factors, such as whether, I have it here listed as sex, male and female, whether you're maybe older or younger. You could also put down a number of things like smoking, BMI, or your previous employment history. But the idea is here that we statistically, or even from a study design, we can help eliminate some of these potential causes of that genotoxicity level differences if we've collected that information, if we account for that in our analysis. And so one of the main things here to be able to do that is to have a large sample size. So this is one of the strategies we've been trying to do is, to get people to understand what we're actually doing, what we are going to be measuring, and then the importance of having as many people as possible within that study. So I'm going to just say that this isn't done in a vacuum. This is done with a number of people collaborating from the community level through, so it's from university colleagues, as well as people from other universities. And then just some of the funding that's been involved with the Case Cancer Center, as well as our Clinical Translational Science Collaborative. And then we have that grant under review still with NIHS. The government shutdown that's been threatening over the last couple of months has kind of delayed some of this funding and may continue to delay that. So that's one thing that we didn't account for, but we are still continuing to collect sample surveys as well as biospecimens. And of course, thank you to all the residents who have participated already. And if there's any future participants on this, you can definitely email Healthy Futures. We'll get back to you on a link to that study. And you can also use a QR code if you're interested. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Dr. Galam.
She should be here in a second. Hi, Dr. Glump is here. I think she might be having a little bit of a technical issue.
I'm sorry. I thought people could hear me. I was asking if the slides were up. I apologize. I'm Beatrice Galam, professor of medicine at UC San Diego, here to talk about our East Palestine Health Study. Next slide. I've been asked to address not just our study, but a little bit about toxin health effects. And I just want to start by saying we've seen this before, or at least something much like it, with our work on mixed toxin exposure in the 1991 Gulf War, both with toxins and burn toxins, including with burn pit-associated illness, individuals not only became chronically ill following the Gulf War, with about a third of those exposed now chronically ill, but on top of the initial illnesses, a number of them went on to develop elevated rates of a set of things that we anticipate potentially seeing here, including cardiovascular disease, autoimmune disease, neurodegenerative disease, and cancer. A subset are affected for each of those things, while others seem to be fine, and this led some to deny and disbelieve those who were affected, claiming that their problems were all in their head, or that it was for the purpose of trying to get money, which of course magnified the pain associated with these conditions. We help to define why some are more vulnerable than others, including putting the spotlight on genetic differences in detoxification mechanisms that ultimately prove to be major factors in determining the likelihood and severity of illness. No exposure affects everyone equally, and incidentally, women are commonly disproportionately affected. Next slide. We also were responsible for defining core toxic mechanisms associated with that mixed toxin exposure, putting the focus on the energy powerhouses of cells called mitochondria, showing that damage to mitochondria was central not only to Gulf War illness, to that mixed toxin associated illness, but that these mitochondrial toxicity mechanisms apply for virtually all chemicals with potential for toxicity, irrespective of their supposed specific mechanism of action. So that these mechanisms affecting mitochondria and their downstream effects are especially likely to define the illnesses arising with mixed toxin exposures, because even if levels of individual chemicals are safe, these mechanisms add and synergize across chemicals. In East Palestine, we're already seeing health problems that are a match: Gulf War illness compatible multi-symptom illness, burn pit-like respiratory conditions, and classic mitochondrial problems like seizures, heart failure, and stroke-like episodes. Of course, other mechanisms and illnesses are likely to arise as well, and those will be tracked as well, but at least we have a jump start by understanding one core set of mechanisms and health problems that are likely to be significant in the setting. Our health study, working with the East Palestine and surrounding communities, seeks to leverage that knowledge, hard-won, working with past mixed toxin exposures, so that those affected in East Palestine and beyond don't have to wait the 30-plus years for recognition and help like those affected by burn pits had to. Next slide. Our study welcomes adults and children, and we have human subjects approval for both, including affected and unaffected individuals, and we're particularly hoping for those that were close in and heavily exposed but remain unaffected, because those individuals are particularly important for providing hints to protective mechanisms. The study involves surveys to assess exposures, health effects, impact on lives, and critically, risk and protective factors. It involves follow-up surveys to track people over time, because the expectation is that, like with Gulf War veterans, some health problems will be delayed and only emerge later. And incidentally, those affected by the delayed conditions need not be those affected by the early conditions. The study also involves optional components that people can elect to participate in or not, including an extensive suite of laboratory tests that assess lab measures of exposure, of health effects, and of important mechanisms. It involves securing archives, that is to say, saved samples, so that when new knowledge emerges later and people say, oh, you should have measured X, we still have the ability to go back and do so. It involves, as you've heard from others, wristbands, in this case with intent for what's called non-targeted exposure assessment, not just presupposing which chemicals may be relevant and not shackled by presuppositions about what toxins may be involved. Next slide. We hope that individuals here will participate actually in many studies. You've heard some wonderful studies here today from the other researchers, but naturally we especially hope that you'll participate in ours. By doing so, you could help your neighbors, your family, your children, those you have now, and perhaps those that may be yet to be born. Those that participate in blood tests will have access to laboratory measurements that you can share with your doctors. If down the line you or your child develops a health problem and you wonder, is it related, this study may help to provide those answers. Some who have participated noted that just the process of filling out the surveys brought their attention to factors and behaviors that they could modify to potentially benefit their health going forward. Next slide. Why this study and why us? We've stood by those affected by chemicals with toxic effects that we've studied before. Our work has led to regulatory change federally and even internationally for at least 3 separate agents. For Gulf War illness, we've characterized exposure relations, risk factors, objective markers, defining mechanisms, and even shown effective treatments. because I have a background not only in epidemiology, but biology with a PhD, and medicine with a medical degree and many years of clinical experience. And because we've done research in each of those domains, we can not only show what is wrong, but why, and perhaps what might be done. Next slide. Genevieve Kulkarni and Jessica C2 are here, and they're two of our incredibly talented staff who have really shown initiative and leadership on the East Palestine issue. And Genevieve will read a couple of unsolicited comments shared with us by veterans that our work has sought to help in order to show that we've gained their trust as we hope to gain yours. Incidentally, we left it to 2 on the slide, but there are additional comments from veterans available on the online link. And also you can see a moving poem by Gulf War veteran David Winnett relevant to East Palestine affected individuals called All in Your Head. Genevieve?
One of our veterans says, "Thank you, Dr. Galamb and all your team. I appreciate all your hard work and dedication in serving those who served. My Gulf War experience has haunted me for 32 years. I have enjoyed participating in all the studies I qualified for and will continue to assist you in discovering the causes of suffering for thousands of veterans who fight their Gulf War signs and symptoms daily. You honor veterans in dedicating your life's work in helping us discover the root causes of our illnesses, and for that I am grateful to you forever. With a sincere and true heart, Ted." Another one of our veterans says, "Dear Dr. Galamb, as a retired U.S. Marine officer and Gulf War vet, I wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you for your tireless efforts in supporting those service and their families who have struggled with their Gulf War syndrome. Thank you again for your patience, your time, and loyal service on our behalf. Best regards, and may God bless you."
Thanks so much, Genevieve. I want to close by thanking those who've already shared their experiences through our survey and given their blood for our laboratory tests. And we hope that if you were exposed and have not yet participated, you might consider participating too. Thank you so much.
Our next speaker will be Kristen Malaki.
Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can see my screen. I will go to my thing. I'm Kristen Malecki. I'm a environmental epidemiologist, and I've just been listening to all of the ongoing research and listening to previous work that we've gathered from working with community partners and thinking about all of that is going on in East Palestine. And I'm sure you're all very overwhelmed. But understanding that this is really important work that's happening here. I wanted to talk about, my background is that I'm a molecular environmental epidemiologist. I'm currently the division director for environmental and occupational health sciences at the University of Illinois at Chicago. But today I'm here to talk about a workshop that's being sponsored by the National Academies of Science, Environment, and Medicine and Engineering, November 6th and 7th. The goal of this workshop is to bring together researchers, including, and I hope many of the researchers that have presented today, as well as community members and voices. We're really trying to bring together everyone to think about what the future research needs are to ensure that we can better understand the health and mental health and well-being impacts of the East Palestine train derailment. As you've all heard, there are many different facets to this. And so the workshop will really bring together a number of experts, and there are a number of national experts who are also working on this workshop planning committee. I won't go through it all, but really the workshop will focus primarily on developing research questions and specific to the concerns of affected and potentially affected communities. So one ask that we currently have is, as you listen to all of these talks, I know that there were many questions and comments in the chat, but what are the most pressing research needs that you see right now in your community? Knowing the ongoing research that's happening, what's being missed, and what more is needed. I think the planning committee would love to hear your voices, and there will be a couple opportunities for that. The workshop will look at both exposures, the physical, mental, social, and behavioral impacts of the train derailment, thinking about both the short-term and long-term impacts, and then also thinking about answering questions: do we have enough ongoing monitoring, or is more needed given the complexity of the potential chemicals and exposures that were released as a result of the derailment? I saw in the chat there was a little discussion about we need more resources around mitochondrial DNA. Those are exactly the types of research ideas that should be brought forward as part of this research planning. We also will look to prior disasters. So I think the Dr. Glom's research really led to some insightful research that then was very applicable, unfortunately, to the East Palestine derailment. And so what else can we learn from past events in terms of what do we need to be doing and thinking about how to establish a future research agenda? So with all of that in mind, the workshop will lead to a workshop in brief, and we will be gathering input prior to the workshop, and then we will also be sharing results of the workshop with many people after. And there's a workshop registration here. It's from November 6th to 7th, and then public comment period will be open through November 5th. So I'm going to leave this up for just a second. And then we do have several small group discussions occurring this week, tomorrow through Wednesday. I know everyone has busy lives, but it would be great to get folks and perspectives there. So if you can go to the National Academy's website and sign up for those listening sessions, we would love to have you there as well. Thank you. I'm going to go to the next one really quick, and I'll leave this here briefly. These are small group discussions that will be happening October 17th through 19th. And if somebody wants the link, just let me know. We can move on. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Judith Inc.
Thank you. I'm Judith Inc. I'm the president of Beyond Plastics. I'm a colleague of Jessica Kanar in East Palestine, a new colleague working to eliminate plastic pollution. I'm a professor at Bennington College and also a former EPA regional administrator during the Obama administration. And I've dealt with emergency response situations, but nothing like this. This was unprecedented. And I think it's really good that the National Academies is doing this workshop. And I wanted to speak last because I wanted to hear from the health researchers. But I would suggest that we also need a workshop on the utter and complete failure of state and federal environmental agencies for protecting public health and the environment in this instance, because we have to learn from this and we have to be far more responsive to community needs. It is not too late. Some immediate things that need to happen is soil still needs to be tested. I'm still looking for some surface samples inside people's houses. Everyone who has concerns about volatile organic compounds in their indoor air need to get that tested. We need long-term medical monitoring because we know that for many cancers, the latency period is long, 20, 30 years sometimes. But we also need people to get some financial relief for their immediate health concerns going on right now. We need agencies to test filters, particularly at schools and public buildings. The government needs to stand up for these residents and pay the expense of relocating people if they want to be relocated, and reject the incredibly unfair proposition by the polluter here, the railroad, that to buy out someone's houses, people need to agree not to sue the polluter in the future. That should be rejected out of hand. These are very reasonable requests that we need people in government to provide to local residents. I appreciated Dr. Stephen Lester's comments on dioxin. I want to zoom in on vinyl chloride. Vinyl chloride is the toxic chemical that was used, that was in the 5 train cars that were purposely set on fire. And as any EPA scientist knows, when you burn vinyl chloride, you get the formation of dioxin and other chemicals that we don't even know about. Over 99% of vinyl chloride is used to make polyvinyl chloride or PVC plastic. PVC is the poison plastic. There are alternatives to it. PVC is used for drinking water pipes, consumer packaging, vinyl siding on our homes and floors. which is a real concern for firefighters when homes catch fire. And even children's toys, rubber duckies that float in your kid's bathtub is made from PVC plastic. Vinyl chloride is a human carcinogen. It causes liver cancer. Unfortunately, it's associated with lymphoma, leukemia, brain cancer, and lung cancer. It was designated a carcinogen in 1974. 1974. And in that very same year, the federal government wisely banned the use of vinyl chloride in a small amount of products, hairsprays, if you remember those items, refrigerants, cosmetics, and drugs. That was 49 years ago. Since then, PVC plastic has been banned in Canada, Spain, South Korea, and the Czech Republic. Even private companies acknowledge the problems with PVC plastic. In 2022, companies like Target, Walmart, Nestle said they will stop using PVC plastic for packaging. And I'm giving you this overview on PVC plastic because the plastics industry is on track to double plastic production in the next 20 years. That means more chemicals like vinyl chloride will be transported all over the country on our nation's rickety rail system. We don't want another community to go through what the residents of East Palestine and neighboring communities have had to go through. Now, here's a little bit of potential good news. EPA has the authority under the Toxic Substances Control Act to ban chemicals that are particularly dangerous. Federal law lays out a 6-year process which EPA can undertake to ban a chemical. They don't need to go to Congress to get permission to do this. EPA could use their existing authority. And in fact, EPA published a work plan for chemical assessments in 2014, and it includes vinyl chloride as one of the chemicals that should be assessed. It's a known human carcinogen. It's present in drinking water. It's present in indoor environments. It's present in surface water. It's present in ambient air, groundwater, and soil. So the question now is, will EPA take the step to follow the procedure already laid out in federal law to ban vinyl chloride? I think they need to do that. And in fact, Beyond Plastics, working with other groups, including the Hip Hop Caucus, Moms Clean Air Force, Plastic Pollution Coalition, River Valley Organizing, went to Washington in July, held a news conference in front of the EPA, calling on them to ban vinyl chloride. We delivered tens of thousands of petition signatures, and then had a meeting with the assistant administrator, who is the decider on this. We're told that this decision will be made very soon, and certainly by the end of the year. The EPA has all of the information they need to ban vinyl chloride. And I would direct you to this really long but really important book called Deceit and Denial: The Deadly Politics of Industrial Pollution by Drs. Gerald Markowitz and Dr. David Rosner. Half of the book deals with the health and ecological impacts of vinyl chloride. The book was published in 2002. We just need the EPA to read this book, to follow the science, and make sure that we don't have even more vinyl chloride going through our communities by train. I hate to say this, but if vinyl chloride is going to be transported all over the country, even more than it is today, there will be other train derailments with toxic chemicals. But I earnestly have to hope that the lessons of East Palestine have been made, and there will never be another irresponsible decision to set 5 train cars of vinyl chloride on fire. That was not the most protective route I know there was concerns that the cargo might explode. However, the owner of the vinyl chloride said that that was never a risk. When I was a federal regulator, what I did in situations like this is have vacuum trucks come to the site, remove the chemicals, and then bring it to a commercial hazardous waste disposal facility. They too have a list of problems, but nothing like draining 5 train cars of vinyl chloride into a ditch and purposely setting it on fire. This was unprecedented, and it really should never happen again.
Thank you. Thank you, Judith, for being here today. A tough act to follow. We greatly appreciate it. So we've heard, some updates on what's going on, and we're going to have a moment if everyone wants to put their questions in the chat. Whatever researchers are still here, we can try to get those answered. And I will also post a few actions everyone can take in the chat. Obviously, signing the petition to ban vinyl chloride is incredibly important. We also have a petition to get a major disaster declaration assigned to East Palestine and the surrounding community. And also, we're asking everyone to email our FEMA coordinator, who at this point, no resident has heard from. He only has until mid-November to make a decision on if we should get this disaster declaration. So it's pretty wild. We haven't heard from him yet. So I'm going to drop those links in the chat. And if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the chat or raise your hand. All right, it looks like we have a phone number with a hand raised. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Dr. Golan. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I just wanted to respond to the comment about assessing mitochondrial DNA, and I wanted people to know that that is actually in our plan and already IRB approved, and we have the test company that will be assessing mitochondrial DNA injury, and we're also sending out buccal swabs for whole genome, nuclear, and mitochondrial DNA analysis as part of our study for those, again, who everybody gets to choose what parts they participate in. And for goal 4, we actually did find that there are certain heritable mitochondrial, what are called haplogroups, which are ancestral patterns that we hypothesized would be related to higher risk and severity, and that in fact were. So I think that's an excellent suggestion, but we already have it in hand.
Amazing. Thank you, Dr. Glom. All right, it looks like I have a hand up. David Brown, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that we have to face the fact that the people that were there and that were affected are not really being supported. It's not something that you can just have a company or even the CDC come to somebody and say, either leave or not, it's up to you, or come back. Your houses are safe because we can't identify anything. In no real sense, as a toxicologist, which I am, could anyone look at what happened to those houses and what the people are saying is happening now? Could you conclude that those people are safe and not being injured right at this minute? But we don't have any organized, systematic way to help individuals who are being affected when they are being affected. It's saying leave your house and we'll put you in a hotel and then bring you back when it's safe, when we know we can't find out that it's safe, I think is irresponsible. I know the question is, what can be done to make EPA and CDC and FEMA realize that when these events are happening, the people have to be supported immediately?
Do any of our presenters have a first thought?
Sure. I'm a former federal regulator, and David Brown, I think that's a really good point. But I want to point out that the federal EPA does have existing authority to protect people in the way that you are articulating. I'm completely puzzled by what we saw happen in East Palestine. And I'm, believe it or not, quite hesitant to be publicly critical of my former federal agency. However, the system didn't work here. And there are large numbers of very competent EPA career staff that work on emergency response. And if people want to be relocated short-term or long-term, they should be. There's often concern about cost, but here you've got the responsible party, i.e. the polluter, who should be paying the cost of relocating people, taking care of health, as opposed to paying for public relations gimmicks, which is unfolding right now. I think, some of the best people I worked with at EPA were the emergency response staff. They know what to do. Completely puzzled why they did not do indoor surface sampling for various contaminants. Completely puzzled why there was such a short period of time before they gave the all clear for people to come back. And the only way I can explain this is that there is a culture at the EPA to defer to state agencies and governors in situations like this. Sometimes that makes sense because the state agencies know their communities and the governors are supposed to represent their best interest to their constituents. But federal EPA has far more experience dealing with emergencies like this one, particularly involving chemicals. And in my judgment, the federal EPA deferred too much to the state of Ohio, and the state of Ohio deferred too much to Norfolk Southern. And I think that had a cascading effect of a series of bad decisions.
Hello? Thank you. David, did you have a response to Judith's comment?
I worked at CDC, at ATSDR actually, and we all sort of knew that there were states that could do it and states that couldn't do it or didn't want to do it. So when I looked at that, what was happening, it was like the first 2 hours, it was, this is what you should do it. Get the people out of there, be public health active. And the public health agencies tend to stand to the background and say, this isn't real public health, but it is real public health. Thank you, Judith. That was excellent.
Absolutely. And I noticed a comment in the chat, Judith. Melinda was wondering, why hasn't the EPA banned vinyl chloride? What's holding them back on that?
Oh, I love that question. I think it's because of political pressure from the companies that make vinyl. There's an outfit called the Vinyl Institute, and they actually came out with a press statement this past Friday, maybe preemptively, strongly urging EPA not to ban vinyl chloride. But I think we have a shot here. I don't know what EPA is going to do, but this is going to be decided in the next few weeks, maybe by the end of the year. So if we could all, I don't want to ask residents of East Palestine to do anything else. You're doing so much. But if you could muster one more thing, sign the petition that was dropped in the chat, call your 2 U.S. senators, Vance and Brown, urge them to urge the EPA, because clearly our existing regulatory structure is not equipped to handle the transportation of large amounts of vinyl chloride all over the country by rail. And remember what I opened with, the plastics industry wants to double plastic production in the next 20 years. And I think that's why we're so grateful to have Jess Connor with us at Beyond Plastics, because vinyl chloride is a plastics issue. 99% of vinyl chloride is used to make plastics. And we just cannot stand by and let another East Palestine situation unfold around the country.
Wonderful. All right, it looks like we have about 5 more minutes. Did anyone else have a question for anyone that spoke today? If we didn't get to all the questions in the chat, like I mentioned, we did save this and we will try to get back to everyone. I do want to highlight a comment from Zuja. She said, does anyone have any suggestions about why the CDC came in and said we are sick, but then didn't do anything about it? Does anyone have any ideas on that? I mean, it puzzles me personally. All right. Nope. None of us can figure it out. That's okay. All right. I'm just reading through the comments here. And yeah, I think we all agree that Norfolk Southern owes us some justice. But a big part of getting that justice is working with the people on this call right now. So between the researchers, the doctors, the scientists, the testers, the community organizers, I keep joking with Jess Connor that it takes a village, and it really does. So I want to thank you to everyone who spoke today and everyone who took the time to listen. We did record this, so once we have it downloaded and everything, we will post it on our Facebook page, and I will also circulate any presentations that happened today on our Facebook page. And as always, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to email unitycouncil2023@gmail.com. Other than that, I think we can settle up a couple minutes early today. So, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks to all involved.